one. We're back on here, and we got Jeff, Director of Revenue Operations at Sedera Health. Jeff today is talking about best of suite software has returned, and I myself feel like this is a trend that kind of goes through ebbs and flows. So I am very curious to hear your thoughts on the topic.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. Yeah, as Adam mentioned, I'm Jeff Offerdahl. I run revenue operations at Sedera Health, and my hot take is that best of suite software has returned. So before getting into kind of some of the details of that hot take, as I said, I work at Sedera. We're an Austin, Texas based medical technology startup, really a unique company. Our mission every single day, why we get up in the morning is to disrupt the healthcare industry, which is oftentimes is associated with really high cost, a lack of transparency. And so kind of what we've built is a medical cost sharing solution and community that's really meant to kind of cure those two things. So provide lower healthcare cost oftentimes when people and patients are at their most vulnerable, and then also drive a lot more kind of transparency around medical events and medical procedures. An interesting fact about me is that I'm an avid Texas Longhorn fan, which I'm not going to lie, it's been really tough these last 5 to 10 years. Fortunately, when I was growing up, we were a little bit better, but being in Austin, I think that kind of being a Longhorn fan is a part of a lot of people. So again, it's been a little tough these past few years, but we'll push through it. But yeah, so getting kind of into the hot take specifically, I think it'll be helpful kind of just to start with a little bit of background, or I guess more of a timeline that I'm going to kind of divide up by decades or by eras, however you want to think about it. So I'll start with the 1990s, and I'll admit this dates me a little bit, but from what I understand, the 1990s was more of kind of the enterprise software era, right? Where companies, they're consolidating their technology decisions. You have a lot of kind of Fortune 500 companies making technology decisions around really a handful of large enterprise software companies. SAP comes to mind, Oracle comes to mind, right? Which, I guess I would characterize 1990s as more of kind of a best of suite sort of era. And then kind of at the end of that decade, you have Salesforce kind of being founded, and they start with the mantra of no more software. I think their original number was 1-800 no software, and kind of getting away from on-premise software and being kind of more in the cloud computing realm. So as you move into the 2000s, really, Salesforce, I think that founding paves the way for a lot of these other kind of companies getting founded in the 2000s. And, what I would call this era is more, the cloud computing incubation era. So essentially a lot of these cloud computing companies get founded, and they slowly start to understand the market and develop solutions. So, a few companies that come to mind are, Zendesk, ServiceNow, HubSpot, Box, Dropbox, DocuSign, companies like that. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but you start to see these companies pop up a lot more and really challenge kind of a lot of the large enterprise players like Oracle and like SAP. So a lot of that goes on in the 2000s. And then, what happens in the 2010s? I think the 2010s just really becomes kind of the SaaS era, right? Where, it's less about these. There are a lot of companies that get founded in the 2010s, but what you really start to see is a lot of the SaaS companies that were founded in the early 2000s, they really begin to thrive and they really begin to flourish, right? So if you look at charts around or data around venture capital funding or private equity funding in the 2010s, or even the number of software technology IPOs, you really see an increase in the trend going up and to the right. And I think as these companies flourish and they do really, really well in their particular niches, for instance, HubSpot and marketing automation and CRM, ServiceNow for IT service management, it really drives companies to make more of best of breed technology decisions because they want to make sure that their company and their end users are using kind of the best solutions available in market, thereby driving a lot of end user satisfaction. So the 2010s, I would classify it as the SaaS era, and now obviously we're at the beginning of kind of the 2020s, and what is that era? Well, I would argue, or one can make an argument that we're really more in the Salesforce era, right? And so I think Salesforce is interesting. They were kind of born out of Oracle, and Mark Benioff used to be an Oracle employee, and Larry Ellison was like an original investor in Salesforce, I think. And I think there's actually a lot of differences, but there's also a lot of similarities. Kind of in this illustration, the similarity is Salesforce is beginning to, and already has, consolidated a lot of different sort of software disciplines, which I'll go into detail here in a second. And I don't think it's unreasonable to think that the 2020s could be, it could be more similar to the 1990s than the 2010s, in that it's going to drive a lot more best of suite technology decisions versus kind of best of breed technology decisions that were occurring in the preceding sort of decade. So that's kind of a high level background. Kind of getting more into the Salesforce product landscape specifically. This slide is just, I'm not going to go through all of these because it's frankly a little bit overwhelming, but this is just meant to show that Salesforce has quite the kind of breadth of products, touching a lot of different areas of the business. And so firstly, you have kind of two market leading marketing automation solutions. You have kind of Marketing Cloud, formerly known as ExactTarget, and then you also have kind of Pardot, right? You have Tableau now as Salesforce's kind of analytics tool or analytics cloud. You have kind of Demandware, which Salesforce bought a few years ago, that is now kind of the e-commerce cloud for more kind of e-commerce geared sort of businesses. You have MuleSoft, which was another kind of acquisition, which is kind of Salesforce's integration or middleware tool. And most recently, you now have Slack in the portfolio, which is obviously a market-leading sort of collaboration tool. You also have CPQ Billing, CPQ, Flow, Heroku, Einstein, right? The list goes on and on. And so, again, what this is really meant to demonstrate is Salesforce pretty much, maybe except HR or, more financial planning-based solutions, they really have solutions that touch all areas or most areas of the business, which is, pretty fascinating because, 5-10 years ago, that really, that wasn't necessarily the case. And they've gone, I think, kind of on an acquisition spree to be, that kind of best of suite sort of vendor. And so I think that's kind of, it's definitely leading to a new trend in the 2020s. So I think it's definitely breadth, but it's also depth of products as well, right? These solutions aren't at the bottom of the market, and I'll show you kind of 3 distinct examples of how Salesforce solutions are market leading. The first example is around what Gartner calls Customer Engagement Center. And those of you who are unfamiliar with Gartner, I'm sure most, or if not all of you are, Gartner is kind of like almost like the Bible for evaluating different software platforms in certain areas, for instance, Customer Engagement Center. And so a lot of companies look at kind of where their company falls kind of on the Gartner Magic Quadrant, which I think is issued most of the time quarterly or annually. So in the case of Customer Engagement Center, you see that Salesforce is kind of in the top right quadrant, which is really kind of designated as the leadership quadrant. So that's one example. And another example is kind of around analytics, right? Again, Salesforce, via the acquisition of Tableau, and I know, Salesforce is busy doing a lot of things integrating Tableau with Salesforce and with existing Einstein analytics and things like that. Salesforce is now a market leading analytics solution, or what Gartner calls analytics and business intelligence platforms, right? So that's another example. The last example, and I think there are a lot more examples than this, is around digital commerce. So again, it's Salesforce bought Demandware a few years ago and has kind of folded it into their commerce cloud. They've built a pretty powerful solution that is being corroborated by Gartner here in terms of the digital commerce Magic Quadrant. Again, you could see that Salesforce is on kind of that top right leadership quadrant. So the point of this is that not only does Salesforce have the breadth of solutions, but they also have really deep solution, oftentimes or most often, that are leading solutions within that particular kind of space or niche, which is, I think, just pointing to, again, kind of the rise of the Salesforce era. So this slide, I'm just going to kind of go through different company characteristics and where they fall kind of on the best of breed versus best of suite spectrum, right? So I think there's a few themes here. So the first one is around funding, right? So companies that are really flush with capital, maybe they just went through a Series D or a Series E, they're going to have a lot of funds to spend, and I think that's more of an argument for a best of breed approach. Go out and get the most expensive best solutions, but not all companies are like that, right? A lot of companies will be self-funded or at a different stage, or may have tighter budgets, right? And that may entail kind of more of a best of suite approach versus a best of breed. So one of those characteristics that you can use to evaluate your company in terms of what sort of strategy you want is around financing or is around funding. The next one is around just kind of internal sort of capacity, right? And this one I think is a little bit more implicit because it's based off of internal headcount versus necessarily like outside funding. If you think your company has a lot of capacity and a lot of specialization versus people who wear multiple hats and are more generalists, that may be a better argument for best of breed. Whereas companies that are limited in their capacity and they're handling a lot of things, and they may not kind of have the bandwidth of the capacity to shepherd specific implementations through, it may be more beneficial to take a best of suite approach versus a best of breed approach. The next one is around kind of switching costs. So companies with lower switching costs, that's probably a better argument for best of breed, because obviously it's going to be easier to switch and you can rip and replace things a lot easier. Companies with low switching costs, it probably means that they've already taken a best of breed approach kind of since their genesis or since their beginning, right? Whereas companies with higher switching costs, they may be beholden to maybe one vendor or a couple different vendors, depending on where they are within their life cycle, and it just may not make as much financial sense for them to switch vendors or to switch vendors as often. The last one is also around, like the internal capacity characteristic. This characteristic is just around end user satisfaction. So I found that issuing kind of being a revenue operations leader, issuing surveys to your end users and your constituents is really powerful. And so assuming that you've issued those surveys, if you have a high level of end user dissatisfaction with what you call your incumbent technology, that's an argument to take a best of breed approach, right? Go out, scope, evaluate those market leading solutions and procure the best ones in the market that make the most sense for your business. Contrast that with end users that are incredibly happy with their incumbent technology, right? Like if you use Salesforce for Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, CPQ, billing, ERP stuff, like, you don't need to go out and look at the best market leading solutions. And that may be a reason to stick with kind of your best of suite approach. And so, the point of all of this is I think that there are a few qualities or a few characteristics that you can kind of assess where your business is at that can really assist you, assuming that you're a stakeholder or you're the decision maker in some of the technology decisions for the business. It can really assist you in kind of making the best technology decision possible, and also kind of whether you should take more of a best of breed versus a best of suite approach. So really the question to ask yourself is, where does your company kind of fall on this overall spectrum? And so that kind of leads me, I think this is my last slide here, and then we can hopefully open it up to some questions. The key takeaway, I think, if I had to kind of summarize this, is don't always take a best of breed approach. I think that it's really tempting to take a best of breed approach and just say, especially again for companies that have a lot of financing and have a lot of money that could lead them to making a best of breed decision. It's really tempting to do that because you want the best technology for the users, but oftentimes that actually, even though Gartner may say that it is the market leading technology, it may not make the most sense for your business. And so don't always be tempted by a best of breed approach, and really consider multiple factors when you're making important technology decisions. Because again, I think that one can make an argument that the 2020s is going to be more of a, it could be described as a Salesforce era, and it may make more sense to make a best of suite or take a best of suite approach rather than a best of breed approach. So that's kind of how I would summarize this. And if there's anything you took away from this presentation, I think that's it. So short and sweet. That's all I got, and I'll turn it over. Hopefully, we have some time for some Q&A.
Yeah, it's and I know we are already at time, so we'll be pretty quick. It's interesting. Just one observation on this. It's a lot to cram in a short period of time. Like the 2010 kind of the SaaS era ultimately led to these best of suite ones like your Microsoft, your Salesforce, your Google's. Like they've acquired a lot of that. I think also, another takeaway on the flip side to view this is from people building software is like, how do you integrate with an ecosystem? Maybe it leads to an acquisition of some kind, but also like another spin of it is not necessarily is best of breed and versus best of suite, but also we live in an age where like everything has to talk well, and you in a revenue operations role know like that one of the primary requirements is how are these tools going to work together? How's the data going to flow? How can different teams leverage the data to trigger different processes? And a lot of people now, you're looking for a solution where everything just like works together, and you're probably usually going to find that better in a best of suite than in a best of breed. But it's a one of those main requirement checklist of like, what exactly are your hard requirements for selecting a tool, to understand if one or the other, if they're both options, or if one or the other is really the only one based on what you're really looking for. Because what it really comes down to is like tools don't dictate process dictates tools. So, if your checklist can be accomplished by a best of suite solution and everything just works, great. But sometimes that may not always be the case, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that goes back to the key takeaway, and that it's not always going to be a unanimous decision, and you need to kind of consider both approaches. But yeah, I mean, I think integration is definitely one of the keys in all of that, as you kind of mentioned, which I think is why Salesforce's acquisition of MuleSoft was so important, right? Because it essentially, and I know that it's not kind of fully baked in every single module or every single product yet, but you have kind of the beginnings of data being exchanged back and forth between a lot of these different modules. And oh, by the way, you have the analytics engine to kind of do that visualization and data storytelling, right? And so I think what you're going to get at the 2020s is that all of this, if you have your data in Salesforce, it's all or a lot of it is going to be integrated, and it's going to be connected to where you can tell these kind of powerful data stories, using Tableau or another solution.
Yeah, and that'll be as the availability and options of tools, I see that is continuing. It's always been a trend, but even more now than ever is like how do you ensure that the tech stack that you do have, whether it's best of breed or best of suite, all talk to each other and can present like a fully integrated solution. So
Yeah.
Well, cool. We actually went 6 minutes over, but it is currently a little bit of a lunch break. There'll be speed networking at 12:45 Eastern. I believe it's 9:45 Pacific time for anyone that's interested in that. And if you have any additional questions with Jeff, we encourage you to check him out, connect on LinkedIn, and we'll also be sharing all the slides and recordings after the event. So, Jeff, we appreciate it. Hope you have a great day. Hope your Texas pulls off some more wins this season. And yep, have a great weekend.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for having me on. Thanks, everyone.
All right, bye guys.